Chapter 8, With My Soul, Vika's POV. My heart nearly exploded in my chest when Asher kissed me. I'd seen his intention before he'd acted, and I had no desire to stop him or pull away. Slowly, he rolled off of me and got to his feet. He held a hand out to me, and I quickly grabbed it, allowing him to help me up. Even if you weren't already engaged, there is a bigger problem with this picture, I sighed. I hated to admit that Malcolm was right. I didn't love Princess Devi, but my father had arranged our pairing. It was the best match for the pack's strength and the continuation of my family's rule and bloodline. I didn't want to think of hurting Vika like that. The night we'd spent together, just talking, had been more intimate than anything I'd ever shared with any other female. I craved that feeling again, and only her face came to mind when I thought about it. It isn't that big of a deal, is it? I asked. Malcolm rolled his eyes. I know you're not that dense, he said. You shouldn't meet with her tonight either. Why? I asked, irritated. Malcolm chuckled and shook. I rolled my eyes. Sometimes, he could really be a pain. Either you'll get more attached, or she will. You should reject her now. It is the best thing you can do for the pack and her, he said. I don't believe that, I argued. Man, what could happen? Malcolm asked, say you two spend time together and really hit it off. Your feelings grow, then, your wedding day arrives, and you have to reject her anyway. It would hurt her less if you did it now. It would free her and keep her from that humiliation. Again, Malcolm made a good point. I had mixed feelings about my engagement to Devi as it was, but that wasn't something I'd get out of so easily. We smiled at each other. You know, for someone who doesn't accept any formal training, you're pretty good, Asher told me. Besides, as much as I didn't want to admit it, I knew our different social classes mattered. Prince Regent Asher. The sarcastic voice of my younger brother, Lucian, interrupted my conversation with Malcolm. What? I snarled. I'm here to challenge you to a duel, Lucian said, raising a sword. I almost laughed at him. All right. He came just in time. I grabbed my sword and hopped off the fence I'd been sitting on to talk to Malcolm. I've got to go, but remember what I said. It is better to just rip the band-aid off for both of you, Malcolm said. He hopped off the fence too and waved. What was that about? Lucian asked me. Nothing, I said. I raised my sword. As Lucian and I circled each other in the sparring ring, all I could think of was Vika and our sparring match the night before. I was so lost in that thought that I nearly missed Lucian's attack. Coming back to the moment, I parried Lucian's blade and pivoted, thrusting my arm into his back. Lucian stumbled forward, but he caught himself. With a frustrated growl, he rounded on me and attacked in anger. Big mistake. As he ran toward me, I readied my sword like I would block again. It was a fake out. At the last minute, I stepped to the side and tripped Lucian. My stomach squirmed at the compliment. Thanks. This was my first time to spar with someone whose power is close to alpha level, I joked with him. He fell to the ground, and I placed my sword against his neck. You can't beat me, I told him. Lucian snarled at me, pushing the sword away. Again, all I could think of was laying with Vika in the grass under the stars. Next time, I will defeat you. Lucian jumped up and ran off in a huff. I ignored it. All I cared about now was meeting with Vika that night. Chapter 10, You're losing your focus. Vika's POV. Despite Henry's warnings, I already knew I was going to sneak out and go to the training grounds. I'd thought about it a lot, even though there was a chance that Asher might have changed his mind and not show up. I had to go. My heart pounded in my chest with each step toward the training grounds. I kept telling myself not to be hopeful that Asher was even going to show up. When I saw him standing there, my heart beat even faster, galloping like a horse in my chest. I felt my entire body heat up at just seeing him. Giggling like a giddy schoolgirl, I quickened my pace. I wanted to be closer to him, and that desire compelled me forward. Prince Regent Asher, I said, bowing slightly when I was close enough to talk to him. Asher raised an eyebrow at me. I would have been happier if you had just called me Asher every time you met me, or babe or darling if you don't mind. Honestly, I asked you to spar with me so you wouldn't have some excuse to run off, Asher admitted, scratching his hair with his hand. The wicked smile on his face really blew away my bad mood. Why? You are Prince Regent, I replied. It was his title, and I was still a maid, though no one else was there. We're fated mates. No status gap between mates, just step away from all status or identities, Asher said, taking my hands in his. At least, while we are alone together, he gave me a playful pout. I giggled. Alright, Asher, I never get tired of hearing you call my name. Asher grinned at me. So, you want to learn to fight, right? He asked, dropping my hands. Yes, I feel like I've taught myself everything I can. If I don't get some kind of instruction, I'll never get better, I confessed. You've chosen a good teacher, then, Asher said, pointing to himself. I couldn't help giggling, my cheeks burning slightly. I tried to compose myself quickly. Asher was training me to fight. This was supposed to be serious. Take your fighting stance, Asher told me, ignoring my giggle outburst. I swallowed, straightening my features and getting serious. I raised my arms and squared my hips. Asher circled me, much like he had the night before, assessing the way I stood. Last time, he'd offered a few pointers. This time, his eyes were much more observant. My gaze followed his. I was wondering what he was thinking. Asher stepped up to me. He was so close that I could feel his breath on the back of my neck and the heat of his body. I arched an eyebrow at him. I'm sure you could have come up with another compelling argument. I teased him. My whole body tensed as we stood close together like that. He grabbed my hips. I squeaked and instinctively tried to pull away. Asher chuckled but kept his grip on me. I'm not going to hurt you, he assured. I'm just going to make a few adjustments. I relaxed in his grasp. He used his foot to push my feet apart ever so slightly, and then he pointed my feet straight. He turned my hips slightly so their angle to my body was a little different. My skin hummed at his touch, my heart beating erratically. When I exhaled, the breath shuddered against my lips. Asher stepped away and walked around to examine how I held my arms. He put his hands around one of my fists. Don't clench your fingers so tightly, he told me. I loosened both my hands a little. Asher's fingers lingered around mine. My face heated again. I looked down quickly when his eyes met mine. As much as I wanted to look right at him, I'd been taught never to look royalty in the eye since working for the castle. I had already been used to it. Sighing, Asher stepped back from me. I glanced up, seeing the dismay in his eyes. We're mates, Vika, he said softly. That means we are inseparable. You don't have to treat me so formally. Asher grinned at me and bounced his thick eyebrows suggestively. Again, my heartbeat accelerated because of his stunning grin. Please, just treat me as your mate. I completely surrendered to him. Okay, but it may take me a while to correct this bad habit. I raised my eyes to his and allowed myself a brief moment of eye contact, just long enough to get a smile from Asher. Next, I found it hard to overcome my years of training and education compared to the small habits I had developed over the month. Asher held his hands up on either side of his head, palms open. Alright, I want you to strike at my palms, he said. Alternate hits with your left and right hands and go where they go. I nodded. I started with my right hand, throwing a punch into his palm. Asher nodded, and then I went with my left hand. He wasn't blocking me or anything, just looking at my form. Use your whole body to put the force behind each hit, twisting your torso at the hips to drive your arm forward. If you rely on arm strength alone, you'll tire yourself out too quickly, he told me. I nodded again and started moving my whole body with each hit. It was amazing how different the impact felt and how my arms were barely tired at all. Asher began to move his palms, and I had to adjust each thrust to keep hitting my target. He smirked at me. You're doing really well, he said. I wasn't prepared for him to step forward. It completely threw off my rhythm. Now that I have your attention, he cleared his throat. Miss Vika, may I have the honor of taking a walk with you? He leaned forward and held out a hand to me like a prince inviting a princess to dance in a fairy tale. I tried to step back so I could hit him with the right force, but my focus had been on my hands, not my feet. I nearly tripped backward, but Asher caught my arm and steadied me. You tricked me, I argued as I regained my balance. Asher shrugged. You've got to learn to move your feet. By the way, tricking is also a technique used in the fight. He was a responsible trainer, wasn't he? I rolled my eyes, getting back into my fighting stance. Alright, let's go again. Asher smiled and nodded, holding his hands up to give me targets again. This time, when he started to move, I was ready. I was able to adjust my footing to keep up with him. Everything he was teaching me tonight was about fighting and being offensive. There was no blocking or evasion or the skills used as wolf form. I couldn't help my mind wandering slightly as I trained. Now and then, our bodies would brush close together, and my breath would catch. Maybe Asher was doing it on purpose as a way to test my ability to concentrate. Each time he got close, I would be distracted, as close as I wanted to be to him. I couldn't help but remember he was engaged to Princess Devi. Even though we were mates, his engagement was still an obstacle. "You're losing your focus," Asher reminded me. He was a prince, could be a future alpha, but I was a maid, an omega. Nevertheless, I still didn't want to refuse his invitation. I dropped my arms, pulled from my thoughts. "Maybe I need a break," I said, not voicing my real concerns to him. "It might sound like I forced him to deal with it if I did. A quick break," he said with a nod. "Okay," I said, stretching my arms out. I was happy my muscles weren't tired or sore. Just like Asher said, he grabbed my wrists and pulled me closer to him. I almost tripped over my own feet again as I fell against his chest. "I can think of a few things to keep us occupied during a break," Asher murmured. "You said it was just a short break," I reminded him, not tending to leave his hug. Asher chuckled and shrugged. "Maybe we can draw it out a little longer," he said. I smiled as he leaned in and kissed me. Asher's grip on my wrists relaxed. I stepped a little closer to him, bringing my arms around his neck. A large part of me worried someone would see us, but I closed my eyes, shutting everything out except how his body felt against mine and how warm his lips were. Chapter 11, We're leaving, Asher's POV. An invitation was slipped under my door from Princess Devi. She was inviting me to a private picnic. She said she wanted to talk about things. I didn't want to see her, but her desire to make peace was admirable, and her old-fashioned use of slipping a note under my door was a little adorable. My responsibility to the pack outweighed my desire not to see Devi. I hadn't had a chance to figure out what I wanted to do because I found my mate, and the more I got to know Devi, the less I liked her. "My pleasure." I put my hand in his palm, and he held it tightly as if nothing could force us apart. "Tell me something about you, Vika." Still, I had to consider what my obligations were. Devi had the whole picnic set up in the garden. She had a blanket spread with lots of food set out and a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket. I recognized Vika immediately, by her scent alone, as one of the maids. "I'm glad you came, Prince Asher," Devi said, standing up from the picnic blanket when she saw me. "This is really great," I told her, sitting down on the blanket. I struggled not to look back at Vika. "I thought I'd do something nice for you since our last conversation was a little rough," Devi admitted. She plopped back down on the blanket and patted the seat beside her. I arched my eyebrow. She did seem like she was willing to just talk. Slowly, I sat down with her. "I appreciate the invite," I said a little awkwardly. "Look, I understand what you wanted to say last time." "I knew I couldn't pretend nothing happened," Devi said, trailing off. I flicked my eyes toward Vika. She still had her head down. I couldn't even see her eyes. "I'm glad you realize it." I was surprised to hear it, but we are engaged. It's an arrangement, and that is a responsibility to the pack. Just as I thought she had some exciting decisions like calling off the engagement, she threw the cruel truth I couldn't avoid to remind me. "Yeah, you are right," I said feebly. Devi turned and smiled a very sultry smile at me. "I'm glad you think so," she said. "I want to know more," Asher said as we walked through the castle grounds. "What do you think you know?" "We have already met twice. Oh no, 3 times plus tonight." The way she licked her lips made me suddenly nervous about being alone in the garden with her. I leaned back slightly, trying to put more distance between us. "Here, I had something special made for us," Devi said. She grabbed a chocolate-covered strawberry from one of the picnic plates. Giggling, Devi leaned in and held the berry up to my lips, sighing. I just pretended not to know her intentions. I took the strawberry in her hand and put the whole thing in my mouth. I was aware of how romantic it was supposed to be, but I didn't want to do it with Devi. Devi took my hand and put my fingertip into her mouth. She licked the little chocolate left on that. I watched as she closed her eyes and moaned as she swallowed the sweet treat. As I took back my finger, she opened her eyes. "Oh, lighten up," she said, nudging my arm with her hand. "We're here to have fun." "I thought we were here to talk," I pointed out, and wiped my hands with a napkin. "I've already said what I think, and you also agree with me," Devi said with a shrug. "Maybe now we should just see where the afternoon takes us." "Sorry, I have other things to do." I stood up. "Don't leave," Devi argued. She grabbed at my arm, but I evaded her. I gave Devi a wave and headed out of the gardens. I didn't get far before my ears perked up at Devi's raised voice. His lips were hot against mine. Instinctively, I wrapped my arms around his neck, knowing he was my mate, lying on the ground with Asher, kissing him. Was I dreaming? "If I am, please, my moon goddess, please don't let anyone wake me up." I glanced at him sideways. His nose was high and straight. If I became the size of a bee, I could probably slide on his nose. Vika's POV, you can't ever get anything right. Devi shrieked, look what you have prepared. Useless, fruit platters, chocolate-covered strawberries, champagne. That should have been my ticket. He only took a strawberry. I took a step back. The moment Asher left, Devi had flown into a rage. She jumped at me. I raised a hand to defend myself, but Sean grabbed my arms and pinned them behind my back. I groaned as Devi grabbed my hair. She pulled so hard that my neck jerked backward. You stupid little B***TCH. You filthy omega. Devi cried. She yanked on my hair again. I saw her face get red as her nostrils flared. Stop, I gasped. This isn't my fault. I struggled against Sean's hold, but she pinched my arms with her sharp fingernails. Did you hear that, Sean? Not her fault, she says. What an idiot. Devi hissed. She spat on my face. I heard it. Complete crap from a dumb omega, Sean hissed in the ear. I winced away, wishing I could wipe the spit off of me. Come on, Vika, you have trained a lot. You can break away from Sean. I struggled against the gamma, but she twisted my arms roughly. I whined, you're going to break my arm. I cried. Good. Devi laughed. Her brown eyes were wild as she raised her hand. I braced myself. She slapped me across the face. Asher smirked at me. Well, I know you're not afraid to defy royalty, a rebel, and brave girl, he teased. My teeth cut the inside of my lip, and I spit blood onto the ground. Devi had seriously crossed a line. I snarled and raised my eyes to glare at her. Stop it, I insisted firmly. Devi's eyes widened. I watched her take half a step back. What did you just say, you filthy omega? Do you think you can give me orders? Devi scoffed. Devi, what the hell are you doing? Asher's voice boomed through the gardens. I smiled at the sound of his voice, too relieved to pretend like I wasn't happy to see him. Asher's POV. Anger rippled through my veins. I clenched my jaw and glared at Devi and that gamma maid. She immediately released Vika's arms and stepped back. Don't let her go. Sean. Devi snapped. Devi, stop, I said, raising my voice even louder. She trembled and cowered away from me. Good, she was easy to intimidate. I thought she wouldn't be so rough on her maid today. After all, I was here for her picnic. I never expected her to beat Vika directly. What right do you have to interfere with how I treat my maids? Devi sneered. She raised her arm again, grabbing the front of Vika's uniform to hold her in place. Snarling, I pushed Devi out of the way. The princess nearly lost her footing as she stumbled aside. I was just angry enough at her deception not to be gentle. I'm not cynical. I admire royalty members, just some of them, I giggled. Like me? Apparently, he was much more than a handsome face. Sean ran forward and helped Devi steady herself. The princess glared at me, pushing Sean off her and crossing her arms. Did you just push me? Devi asked wide-eyed. I did, I said, standing between her and Vika. I wouldn't allow anyone to hurt my mate, even she was the princess. How dare you put your hands on me? Devi snapped. I rolled my eyes. That's ironic, coming from you, I hissed, nodding to Vika. She was rubbing her arms like they were in pain. I'm not some lowly omega, Devi said haughtily. I shook my head. No, you're worse. You're using your power and position to abuse others, I snapped. Devi reeled back like I had just slapped her. Are you seriously going to take the side of a servant over your fiancé? She asked, throwing her arms up into the air. I scoffed and sighed. No, I wasn't going to lower myself to get drawn into a petty debate with her. No more of this. I don't want to see you raise a hand to any of your servants again, I told her. I grabbed Vika's wrist and tugged her arm. Vika gave a nervous squeak, but she had to follow me or get dragged behind. My nostrils flared with every breath. I was too worked up to look at her yet. We're leaving, I growled. Asher, what are you doing? Devi shouted. He was also funny and witty. Not yet, I winked at him. Well, I may have gone a little too far in the history class, I admitted. I ignored her. Asher, I was taking Vika somewhere safe from Devi. Asher. She whispered my name so softly that the princess wouldn't hear. My heart fluttered in my chest, and I squeezed her wrist just a little. Chapter 12, I don't care, Vika's POV. I thought Asher was mad at me. I lifted my eyes and looked at his back. His shoulders and spine were stiff. Now and then, his hand tightened uncomfortably on my wrist. Was he mad at me? No, Vika, that is stupid. What would he be mad at you for? I couldn't comfort myself. Asher had come to my defense in front of the princess. My heart raced at the thought, but I didn't know why he wasn't looking at me or talking to me. Asher brought me to a secluded clearing in the woods. I watched him glance around quickly before he faced me. "Are you hurt?" he asked sharply. "Nothing serious," I told him. He glared at me. Asher took a step toward me and grabbed my arm. He pushed my sleeves up, inspecting me for any injuries. I said I was fine, I argued, trying to pull away. Asher growled. He fixed me with a hardened, angry look. I stopped struggling against him. Yup, he was definitely pissed. He pulled up the sleeve on my other arm and kept examining me. "Are you okay?" I asked him. I knew that his anger wasn't directed at me, but he was like a bomb that could go off at any minute. "You don't need to explain to me." Asher shook his head. "I understand it. I really like the current atmosphere between us." "I'm fine," Asher said with a sharp nod. "You sound a little tense," I pointed out timidly. Asher chuckled humorlessly and lifted his eyes to my face. His eyes softened, and he used his sleeve to wipe the spit off my face. "It passes quickly when I'm with you," he said. I felt my cheeks heat and turn red. He put his hands on either side of my neck and turned my head from side to side, still examining me for any injuries. I just let him. If it calmed him down to look me over, who was I to stop him? "Why'd you come back to defend me?" I asked. Asher sighed. He stopped his examination and gently caressed my throat with his thumbs. I closed my eyes as my skin tingled with warmth. "You know why," he said, his voice calmer now. "Prince." I trailed off when Asher scoffed. He pulled his hands from my neck. I opened my eyes, brow creasing. "Asher." I spoke his name softly. Speaking his name aloud so informally tasted strange in my mouth, but it wasn't unpleasant. Taking my hands in his, he lifted them to his lips and kissed my fingertips. I smiled, small tickles running through my hands and arms. Thinking about what Princess Devi had done to him, I lifted his right hand and licked his index fingertip. I heard his breathing become heavier. How captivating he was. "You really scored the jackpot with him, Vika." It felt like we were equal. There was no status gap between us. I pointed to a small house that we could see from the top of the hill we'd walked up. "Now, if only we could find a way to get around our social statuses." "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "For what?" I asked. "I'm not angry at you," he clarified. I shook my head, bringing my hand to his cheek. "I didn't think you were," I assured. Asher smiled. "I'm not going to let Debbie lay a hand on you, ever," he promised. I sighed heavily, all the former warmth leaving my body rapidly. "Asher, you left the garden with me like that." I trailed off, sighing and averting my eyes. "It wasn't a good idea. Would you rather have me stand there and let you get hit? Do you think I could bear watching that?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I took a step away from him, clasping my hands behind my back and looking down at the ground. "I'm a servant to a princess," I reminded him. "Running off with me like that will just raise suspicions and rumors." "I don't care," Asher said firmly. "But I do," I said calmly. "You're Prince Regent, so you don't have to worry about it. But suppose you're always stepping in and protecting me, or taking me out of dangerous situations. In that case, those rumors are going to cause trouble for me. I'm just a maid, I don't have your standing." I looked up and met Asher's eyes. His face softened, and he nodded. Asher stepped closer to me, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. "That's my home," I said. "I live there with my mother, Magda, father, Robert, and brother, Henry." "And they let you sneak out and train at night?" he asked. "I'm sorry, I didn't think of that," he said, genuinely apologetic. I smiled at him gently. "It's not that I don't appreciate the gesture," I added. "I can't help it," Asher said. "I have such a strong desire. No, I need to protect you." My stomach twisted at his confession. It made me so happy to hear that Asher wanted to protect me and take care of me. It was what any she-wolves wanted to hear from their mate. At the same time, it made me sad. I realized that Asher would probably continue to jeopardize his own relationships for my benefit. I knew he had a responsibility to the pack, and I didn't want him to compromise that. "I can look after myself, you know," I told him playfully. "I have a great teacher." Asher smirked at me, squeezing my shoulders with gentle, pleasant pressure. "You do at that," he said. "I'll make sure you can defend yourself properly, Asher. We have to be careful," I said, stepping back from him again. His hands dropped from my shoulders. "Your attitude is dangerous for me. I'll be the one that takes the heat for anything that is discovered between us, or even suspected between us." I know, I won't ever let that happen, Asher promised. He took my hands in his, clasping them against his heart. I could feel the steady rhythm of his beating heart against my fingers. We were so deeply connected, I was getting in way too deep. I shook my head. Henry is covering for me, I said. My parents don't know, so, I see your special rebellion is not just against the royalty, Asher teased. I didn't even think I'd be able to get out now. I don't love Devi, Asher said after a moment of silence. I creased my brow. I don't love her at all. I don't feel anything toward her. Why are you telling me that? I asked. Asher's hands tightened on mine, pressing my palms against his warm, sculpted chest. The heat radiated through his shirt. As her maid, you have to stand by and watch our interactions, he explained. I don't want you to ever have to wonder if something has happened between the princess and me or if it is going to happen. I smiled at his assurances. It had hurt a little to watch Devi flirting with him, but I was glad to hear it aloud that he wasn't going to do anything with her. Stepping forward, I intended to kiss Asher, but we quickly broke apart when we heard footsteps through the trees. Another pack member appeared. I recognized Malcolm, one of Asher's friends. Asher, Malcolm said. I stepped back, lowered my eyes, and headed to the ground. Malcolm, Asher greeted his friend. We've got a few things that need your attention, Malcolm said. Give me a minute, Asher said. I'll be right behind you. Malcolm shrugged and turned around, heading far enough away that he couldn't hear us. I had a suspicion that he knew about Asher and me. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have felt the need to give us privacy. Yeah, you could say that. I sighed and rolled my eyes. I respected what you said in Master Rufus's class. I don't want to leave you alone, Asher admitted with a sigh. I don't want you to get hurt again, Asher. I'll be okay. I have a job to do, and so do you, I pointed out. Asher smirked at me. I saw him flick his eyes toward Malcolm before he lifted my hand and kissed the back of it. I giggled under my breath, my stomach fluttering. I'd only ever seen royalty receive a kiss on the back of my hand. Asher knew how to make me feel special. I have to get back to work anyway, I said. Asher nodded. All right. Please be careful, he said. Avoid provoking Devi if you can. I'll probably be tied up for a while. Go. Be a prince, I said with a playful smile. Asher chuckled and shook his head. He raised his hand to my cheek. Nervously, I glanced over at Malcolm, who still had his back to us. I leaned into Asher's touch as much as I could. Tonight, the same meeting point, he said. It wasn't a request. Before I could answer, Asher left with Malcolm. I wouldn't have a choice but to show up now. Chapter 13, Forget training tonight. Vika's POV. Well, look who showed up, a voice said behind me. I squeaked, jumping around to face Asher. I pushed his shoulder. You scared me. I snapped. Asher just kept smirking. Wanna have a walk first? He asked, holding his arm out. Asher stopped walking, and I did too. He turned to face me. It was impressive that you spoke your mind like that, he said. I nodded and felt my cheeks heat up. The gardens were a complete labyrinth of pathways through hedges, flowers, and trees. Most of the flowers were closed at night, but a few night-blooming ones opened up in the moonlight. Vika, Devi didn't do anything else to you today, did she? Asher asked. I shook my head. I didn't know why Asher was so concerned. I'm fine, I assured him. I fought the irritation that built in my chest. Did he think I couldn't take care of myself? That's why I had to keep training myself in fighting. It was the only way to protect myself and prove to others I could take care of myself. Okay, I'm really sorry for my impulsive actions. I should have considered you before stepping in, he said. My irritation evaporated instantly. I smiled shyly and looked away from Asher again. Why was I still so bashful around him? Pull it together, Vika. You've got this. You don't have to be so squirrely around him. He's your mate. I took a deep breath, but that didn't calm my racing heart. Being so close to Asher was exhilarating and confusing. I bit my lower lip and raised my eyes to his. I was strong. I could face my mate. I want you to know it wasn't my idea to marry Devi, Asher said with a sigh. I'm listening. I raised an eyebrow. He had told me he didn't like Devi. Why did he mention his engagement? When our lips parted, I let out a long sigh. It's you. My sweet water bag in the dream. He gave me another peck on my lips and nodded. The observations you had, the questions you asked. That is the kind of mindset a real leader takes when they analyze threats and risks. Asher chuckled and shook his head. My parents, especially my father, believed marriage would be beneficial for me. You know, I hadn't found my mate in over 8 years. I guess I sort of gave up, so I accepted their engagement. I sighed. Asher's confession made me really sad. I had always been there, just out of reach, but he couldn't know I was his mate until I turned 18. It is so unfair, I said, stamping my foot. Maybe King Regent Vadon had his thoughts about arranging this engagement, but it still felt unfair for Asher. Asher stopped walking. He chuckled softly, apparently amused by my frustration. I sniffed and rolled my eyes. I just mean that you should be allowed to choose who you marry, not the pack, I explained. I agree, Asher said. He patted my hand, and we kept walking. That's why I am going to break off the engagement. What? Asher, can you even do that? I asked, my eyes nearly popping out of my head. I guess we'll find out, Asher shrugged. It doesn't matter what the pack thinks anymore, or what my father thinks. I know that I don't love Devi, and I'm not spending the rest of my life with her, especially not now that I've met you. Are you really willing to give up marrying a princess, because you found your mate? I asked. I looked sideways at Asher. I was impressed to hear that from a servant? I asked. Asher sighed and laughed humorlessly. He turned toward me. You're definitely worth it to me, but, Asher, I'm just a maid, you're a prince, I pointed out. It is my life and my choice, Asher said with a firm nod. I cupped Asher's hands in mine and held them against my chest. His eyes were soft, his arms powerfully strong, and his lips so inviting, my breath trembled from just looking at him. Was I going crazy? Was it crazy to think that as Asher's maid, I was supposed to be more than just a maid? Life and choice, I repeated what he just mentioned. It just seems like I should have more with my life, that I should be doing more, I said, turning away from Asher. What do you mean? Asher walked closer to me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I don't want to be the princess's maid, I confessed, shaking my head. I want to train as a protector of the kingdom. There is so much more for me in life than being Devi's maid. Asher put his hands on my shoulders. His touch was warm, his breath on the back of my neck sent a shudder down my spine. I couldn't even think straight around him. I agree, Asher whispered, his lips so close to my ear. I shuddered again, his hot breath tickling my ear. I giggled and pulled away. Every time he got that close, I just couldn't think. Was that what love felt like? A little bit, yes, he said. I think it was more impressive to hear that over Princess Devi's revenge again. Keep training, Vika, and I'll help you, one day. I bet you'll do it, Asher said, grinning at me. His eyes brightened with pride and encouragement. My heart swelled in my chest. I couldn't remember the last time someone really believed in me. Ever since I saw you on the training grounds the other night, I knew you were meant for great things. I saw how strong you were, and I was immediately attracted to you, even before you shifted, Asher said. What did you see? I asked, chewing my lower lip nervously. I was mesmerized by your beauty, he said in a deep, husky voice. What made you think I'm beautiful? I asked coyly. I turned away from Asher and glanced at him over my shoulder. I saw his eyes light up, and he followed after me eagerly as I started walking. That night, I saw you training. Asher trailed off. You were so graceful and beautiful, so talented and determined. I was captivated. I hung on to each word Asher said. No one had ever said anything so nice or romantic to me before. I squirmed inside my skin. After you shifted and I knew you were my mate, I was grateful that the moon goddess destined me for someone like you, Asher murmured. Are you grateful that your destined mate is an Omega? I teased him, giggling. Asher cupped my cheeks in his hands. We should not start another war against the Love&Lust kingdom. I bit my lip to hold back my laughter. I liked hearing Asher's intelligent breakdown of what I'd said. He studied my face with deep, serious eyes. I could feel him all the way into my bones. I smiled back, wrapping my arms around my fluttering stomach. I looked away from Asher. Every rumor I'd heard about him was true. His attractiveness, his kindness, but he was even better than I could have imagined. You know, you're not half bad yourself, I said, winking. Asher sighed playfully. No? He asked. I shook my head. After all the rumors I'd heard, you were like the god of the pack, everyone's fantasy. I was no exception, I admitted. But those were just rumors, Asher said. I saw his brow crease. I shrugged. I knew from that first morning in your room that they were all true, I said. I looked down at my feet, my cheeks burning. However, the more I realized how good he was, the more I suffered because of our identity gap. You are something, Asher said. He cupped my cheeks, and I faced him again. It doesn't matter, I said, looking away from his eyes. It is useless for us to feel anything for each other. Why? Asher asked. We are fated mates. Do you really think the moon goddess makes mistakes? No, I said. I shook my head. I tried to pull away, but Asher wouldn't let me. Then, why can't we let ourselves feel this way toward each other? He asked. We are part of different worlds, I said, tears springing to my eyes. We are both pack members. We both belong to the kingdom of Bitha. He elevated my intelligence to the same level as him and his father, while also placing me above Princess Devi. Our worlds aren't that different, he scoffed. Asher, you're Prince Regent, I'm a maid. Whatever we have, it will only ever be a fling with a maid. I blinked my tears back. I hadn't said it aloud, but it felt like I was rejecting him. My heart ached, and my knees trembled. A future alpha and a lowly omega, that is all we are to each other, I whispered. No, the woman I love is not a maid. She's not an omega, her name is Vika, and she is one hell of a woman, Asher said. I brought my eyes to his. Bright with affection, he didn't waver as he looked at me. I swallowed into my dry throat. Maid, omega, those are just labels. They aren't who you are. I know who you are, Asher said. I licked my lips, unable to look away. My eyes pricked with tears again, happy tears. I truly felt empowered for the first time, and Asher had given that to me. My eyes focused on his lips. Our faces were close together. I wanted to feel his lips against mine. Fact training tonight, Asher murmured. He crashed his lips into mine. Chapter 14. That wasn't just a nightmare. Vika's POV. I met Asher's tongue with mine, deepening the kiss. He ran his hands down my sides. I moaned and nipped at Asher's lower lip. Asher gasped and grabbed my butt, pulling me closer. It was very sweet, but I was still just a servant. Even if Asher was my mate and we were spending time together socially, he was still royalty. Our bodies pressed together, a shudder ran down my spine, and I clung to Asher tighter. His lips moved to my neck, kissing and nipping down my throat. My thighs clenched together, my stomach dropped and twisted, heat pooling between my legs. I moaned when Asher started sucking on my neck. I shivered, panting. Asher returned his lips to mine and crushed down harder. My heart hammered in my chest as I kissed him back. When I thought my lungs would burst from lack of air, I pulled away, panting and gasping. Asher ran his hands through my hair, still standing so close that my breasts were pressed against his chest. I panted, trying to catch my breath. I scanned my eyes over Asher, looking at his handsome face and strong body. Just talking to you the past couple of nights, I feel like I can really be myself with you, I admitted. I'd never felt so comfortable around anyone, Asher smiled, taking my hand in his. We walked back through the gardens together. My heart fluttered, and I skipped a little with each step. I feel like I've known you my whole life. I know that's impossible, but it is what I feel in my heart, Asher said, squeezing my hand. Asher knew exactly what to say to get my heart rate up. I never wanted the night to end. The starlight set the perfect mood, and it felt like Asher and I were the only two people in the world. I wished it could have stayed that way. This was exactly how I had always envisioned spending time with my mate. I shouldn't behave too proud of his praises. I'd just share my opinion. Redfus said everyone can share their points. I couldn't believe how perfect it all was. I felt what Asher felt too. It was like we'd known each other our whole lives. I don't want to leave you tonight, Asher said when we stopped near my house. I don't want the night to end either, I admitted bashfully. I watched as Asher licked his lips, and I thought about our kiss. Oh, how I wanted to kiss him again. I looked away quickly. If I wasn't careful, I would just grab Asher and kiss him right on the lips. Get it together, Vika, you're acting like a love-struck puppy. Don't overdo it. Asher lifted my hand to his lips and kissed the back of it. My toes wriggled in my shoes, and my heart jumped with delight. His lips were hot on my hand, sending tingles up my arm. What a gentleman. I felt like a princess the way he was treating me. Good night, Vika. Asher squeezed my hand again. When he walked away, our fingers lingered together. I waited until I couldn't see him anymore before I went inside. I snuck up the stairs, taking light steps so they wouldn't creak. Henry was sitting on my bed waiting for me. So, how did it go? He whispered. I rolled my eyes. That is none of your business, I said. I touched my lips. They still felt hot from Asher's kiss. Get out of here. I want to sleep. Sure, Henry said, laughing. Provocative? Asher asked with a teasing laugh. I snorted and shook my head. Inquisitive, I said. My parents have always told me it will get me into trouble one day. I flopped down on my bed, spreading myself out. My mind raced with the memories of my night, that kiss. Well, There was nothing else I could say about it. I hadn't been sure that what I felt for Asher was more than the mate bond. Now I knew that kiss had been so hot. It couldn't have just been the mate bond. Devi's POV. I couldn't believe Asher. He had picked a mate over me? What was wrong with him? Snarling, I paced around my bedroom. I shook my head. I had beat the snot out of that stupid Omega, and still, Asher took her side. She'd been weak and worthless. No, she hadn't been weak. After I had whipped her, she had scared me. For a moment, I'd almost thought she would take a swing at me. Why did that scare me? She was an Omega, she was nothing. I growled under my breath and kicked a chair. Damn it. I snapped. What is Asher thinking? I'd seen it happen, but I still couldn't force myself to believe it. Prince Regent Asher, my fiancé, had pushed me out of the way to defend a maid. Why? How? What? I couldn't make sense of it. Asher was supposed to be mine. I sighed and sat on my bed. I was a princess. My mother and father had been the Luna Queen and Alpha King. Nearly getting slapped by a princess. Yeah, that was trouble. She was being unreasonable, Asher validated with a nod. Any he-wolf that married me would be lucky. I was the whole package. I had silky sheets, all the finest dresses and jewelry. I was beautiful, and I came with the title of Alpha King for my husband. How could Asher not want me? We were supposed to be mates. I'd known that Asher wasn't my mate since I was 18 and shifted for the first time. We'd never talked about it, so I just pretended I didn't know. Of course, now that was suddenly a problem for Asher. Could that lame maid be Asher's mate? Why else would he help her? Oh no, I muttered, jumping up. No, 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 no. I shook my head and paced back and forth. No. I shouted, rage shaking me from head to toe. I punched my fist into the pillows on my bed. That wasn't possible. Why would the moon goddess make the Prince Regent, who could become future Alpha, mate with a dumb Omega maid? I pulled out my phone and called Sean. She would answer no matter how late it was. Princess, what can I do for you? Sean asked. I'm going to bed to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow morning, I want you to bring that stupid maid to my room, I demanded. Yes, of course, Your Highness, I'll make it happen, Sean said. I hung up quickly and threw my phone across the room. Arg! I cried, flopping down on my bed. I was going to teach her a lesson or two. Asher's POV, nightmare. Thank you for stopping her, I said softly. It's Princess Devi, isn't it? His look turned serious, the one who left those bruises and cuts on your arm. I'm not leaving, Magnus. You promised me you would be with me forever. It was the late Luna Queen Krisha's voice. I had heard her same saying before. Here it came, that annoying and horrible nightmare. Even though I realized I was stuck in a nightmare, I still couldn't force myself to wake up, which I didn't know the reason. It was so terrible. I was standing behind the curtain in the king's and queen's bedroom. Again, someone had forced my back there and covered my mouth. I grabbed the curtain with my little fingers and pulled it back. The one who I didn't know had shoved me back there told me I wasn't supposed to look. But I didn't follow his order, because I knew what would happen next. I wondered who killed King Magnus and Queen Krisha. What? You. Magnus' voice gasped from his bed. I was close to the king's bed, so I could see the Alpha King Magnus. He could hardly breathe, his lips black and shriveled, but he was pointing at someone at the end of the bed, someone I couldn't see. I tried to look at the one, but I was still stuck in place, unable to see the one's face due to the heavy white smoke. What the hell was this strange smoke? It didn't choke me but just blurred my vision. How could you? The king gasped. I looked at him again. His eyes were wide and glassy. He recognized the person he was pointing at, his face pale and stricken with fear. That's it, sweet and soft, you remember it. Holding my excitement, I kissed his sexy lips again and smirked. And then? You go beat up Princess Devi. For an Omega, I won't hit her. But I'm not the type to sit idly by while someone else is unjustly punished, he explained. What was happening? Did the king know who the assassin that had come in was? It looked like he knew the one at the end of the bed. As soon as I found out I was released, I rushed out again, but I was lost in the strange smoke. It suddenly went silent, without any sound or words. Krisha. I heard someone shout to the queen. They sounded angry. The voice was familiar. I followed that voice. Krisha, the voice called again. It wasn't just anger, it was sadness. I stopped because I recognized that voice. It belonged to my father. End nightmare. I sat bolt upright in bed, my brow and chest were soaked with sweat. I reached for the cup of water beside me and guzzled it down, my throat cooled, and the burning memory of smoke in my lungs faded. My bones were shaking and sweat had formed on my forehead. What the H*LL was that? That wasn't just a nightmare. Chapter 15, let me change it, Asher's POV. I took a quick moment to sort through my nightmare and the story I'd heard repeatedly about the events from that night 18 years ago. The events I remembered, and the scenes in my dreams didn't add up. Why had my father's voice sounded angry and sad in my dream? I didn't know why he would be so sad about Queen Krish's death. It wasn't like they were particularly close, at least, not that I remembered. He hadn't even been there, had he? He'd been fighting off rogues and hunting down the assassins. I won't let her abuse you again. If I hadn't known how to name my feelings before, I thought I was starting to. Well, that was what the history books said. What was happening to me? Why was I having these dreams? Why couldn't I see or hear the assassin's face or voice? It was like he was a presence beside me in my dream, dragging me along, but I couldn't remember if I hadn't been near the king and queen that night. I groaned and rubbed my temples. Come on, Asher. This isn't worth you obsessing over. Pull yourself together, man. You can figure it out. I got out of bed, leaving my nightmares behind. My father was expecting me. I was ready to talk to him about Vika being my mate. I also wanted answers about that night 18 years ago. King Regent Badon, I said, knocking on the doorframe of his study. Ah, Asher, my son, come in, Badon said, waving me inside. He was standing behind his desk. I bowed when I reached his desk and raised my eyes to his face. Since my father had become King Regent, I felt like I was his subordinate. Every time I saw him, I felt a kind of inexplicable pressure. I'm not interrupting, am I? I asked. I looked at his desk, noticing he was looking at a map of the kingdoms of Bitha and Layman. No, not at all, he said. I watched as he ran his hand through his brown hair. Dad, have you set a date for the wedding yet? He asked, cutting me off. I put my hands on my hips and narrowed my eyes at him. My dad didn't even notice. No, I wanted to talk to you about the engagement, I said. Without a doubt, I was hopelessly falling in love with Asher. It was fast, so fast, but wasn't that the way it was supposed to be when you found your fated mate? Finally, my dad looked at me. His green eyes were sharp and suspicious. What do you want to talk about? He asked, arching an eyebrow and putting down that map. Dad, I don't want to marry Princess Devi, I said, with my heart beating madly. I finally put it out there. He stared at me, his face paled, eyes blank, my shoulders tightened, spine stiff. Oh crap, he was pissed off. Was he going to rip me a new one? Calm down, Asher. You are not a little boy anymore. Get ready, he's not going to hold back, I reassured myself, hoping to stay calm. Nonsense, my father yelled at me. Do you know what you were saying? Is that what a future alpha should say? He came up to me from behind his desk. Asher, you're the strongest he-wolf, you're the future alpha of Bitha. Did you really think about the meaning of marrying Princess Devi? I did, but, then, why did you say that nonsense? You know it means your responsibility is to the pack. You and Princess Devi, that is the best match, my father insisted. He even didn't allow me to finish my words now. Since he became Regent King, he appeared to have changed a lot. It doesn't matter what you want, Asher, you should pay more attention to the whole pack. No, I argued, Father, I don't love her, she is. Are you questioning me, boy? My father interrupted me again. I leaned my head against Asher's shoulder with a sigh. His strong arms held me, and his hand gently patted my back to comfort me. He slammed his fist into his desk. I quickly took a step backward. No, sir, I said quickly, shaking my head. I don't think Princess Devi has what it takes to be a leader. That isn't determined by what you think but by her bloodline, my father scoffed. Dad, will you listen to me? I growled. He narrowed his eyes and crossed his arms. Silence. At least, that meant he was listening. Indeed, Princess Devi is the daughter of the late Alpha King. She is supposed to be the Alpha of Bitha if she possesses a leader's qualities. The truth is she doesn't. It isn't about what I think or her bloodline, it is about her behavior, I said. My dad rolled his eyes. Yup, this was going to be a good conversation. Asher, have you heard the wishes from our pack members? They admired the late great King Magnus. They also like you. Devi is the only daughter of their revered Magnus. They believe you are fated, my dad sighed again. So, in my personal opinion of that girl doesn't change anything. That's it, you don't get my permission to break off this engagement. He sat back in his leather armchair and prepared to ask me to leave. Then, let me change it, I found my mate. I put my hands on his desk, otherwise, I could not control my anger. My father suddenly frowned, his eyes sparkled as he stood up. That changes nothing, he boomed, throwing his hand out to the side. Trust me, Vika, I can protect you. I controlled the urge to cry and just nodded my head. I was grateful that he wanted to protect me. It will change everything. I care about her even though she's. Do not say another word, my dad hissed and grabbed my collar to force me to look into his eyes. I clenched my jaw closed, my teeth grinding together. If I continued, he might shift and give me a lesson. Vika was my fated mate, and we were arranged by the moon goddess. How could my dad dismiss this so easily? Son, let me tell you what you should do next. You're going to reject this maid of yours, and then you are going to pick a date for your wedding to Princess Devi. No. I gave him my answer firmly. We stared at each other, glaring. My father loosened his hands and snarled at the door. Maxis, get in here, he barked. I only had to wait for 2 seconds before Beta Maxis appeared in the study. What can I do for you, Your Majesty? Maxis asked. Get my son out of my sight, he needs to calm down, my father ground out through clenched teeth. Maxis grabbed my arm, I pulled away from him and growled, don't touch me. I snapped, I'm sorry, my highness. Maxis held his hands up, he nodded toward my father's door. I scoffed but followed his lead. There was no point in arguing with my father anymore. I quickly walked away from Maxis. I didn't need him getting in my face. Sighing, I slouched forward. I couldn't believe my father had said that to me. But more than that, I wanted to be stronger and be able to protect myself, my family, and even the pack. How could he? He once boasted that I was his favorite son and pride and joy. Now, he wouldn't even listen to me. My dad. He'd never been so insistent on anything before. Could being an alpha king change a person so much? Damn it. I shouted into the empty hall. My fist slammed the wall. Whoa, dude, what's got your pants in a twist? I heard Malcolm's voice from behind me. I whipped around, snarling at him. Hey, don't shoot the messenger, Malcolm said. He smirked and jumped behind a younger boy. He's Henry, you should have known who he is, Henry. I remembered that he was Vika's younger brother. What are you two doing here? I asked, crossing my arms. Looking for you, Henry said. He put his hands on his hips and looked me up and down. Overprotective brother? I asked, grinning. Henry rolled his eyes and scoffed. He had every right to size me up. I imagined that Vika had told someone in her life the truth, just like I had. Here's the deal, Vika is pretty taken with you. I need you to show me you're actually a decent guy, Henry said. I creased my brow and looked at Malcolm. His face was hard as stone. My stomach plummeted into my feet. I tried to swallow, but my throat closed up. Something was very wrong. What's going on? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I saw the look that Malcolm and Henry exchanged. We looped around the training grounds. Asher stopped and gently released my hand when we got back to the start point. They both looked back at me, faces blank of expression. What? Sean went after Vika again. Will you save my sister? Henry asked in a cold voice after he spat out a terrible thing. I saw she drag your Omega toward Princess Devi's room, Malcolm added. My nostrils flared as I clenched my jaw to hold in my anger. It wasn't working. Every bone in my body was rigid, muscle straining against my skin. Devi, what do you want? You're not getting away with this anymore. Stay here, I will handle it. I took off down the hall to Devi's room. I never wanted this night to end. It was so perfect, and I felt more myself than I ever had, but dawn always came. Asher looked out to the horizon where the sky was starting to lighten. Wow. Oh, I have to get a few hours of sleep before the castle wakes up, I muttered. It is a shame this night has to end, Asher said, voicing my thoughts. Even though I was happy and my whole body was singing, I felt sad suddenly. It's hot and dry, my prince. Asher stared at my face with his gorgeous eyes. It seemed his every eyelash was conveying tenderness to me. Asher and I were going separate ways, back to our totally different, totally separate, totally incompatible lives. Vika, I want to see you again. Asher grasped my hand. His thumb was rubbing the back of my hand. Can we? I asked. Asher chuckled and shrugged. Why not? he asked. Well, you are a Prince Regent, I'm a maid, and I'm an Omega, I pointed out, without mentioning his engagement with Princess Devi. True, but I don't care, I want to see you again, he said. I wanted more magical nights like this with my mate. Still, I wasn't even sure what kind of outcome I would experience once we were found. Why don't we make it more official? Asher asked. What? I asked, shocked. We can meet here tomorrow night and train together. I don't mind being your instructor. Asher offered a suggestion that was very appealing to me. He possessed great power and mature fighting skills. He would be the perfect coach and trainer for me. Okay, I agreed. Asher pulled his phone out. We quickly exchanged cell phone numbers. Have a good rest, my sweet Vika, he told me. I blushed. You too, my prince, I said back. Asher grinned and waved goodbye to me. I was sad to see him go, but I had another night to look forward to. Chapter 9, Reject or Not, Vika's POV. Sorry, I will remember every kiss we have from now on. Never forget. Maybe when you wake up in the morning, you will take everything that happened tonight as a dream or a nightmare. I couldn't take my gaze away from his face. What? Henry cried out. Seriously, you are Prince Regent Asher's maid, not Princess Devi. Shoo. I nodded. Henry and I were doing our laundry. I was so glad no one was passing by. Henry gaped at me, eyes as wide as his mouth. As a heart attack, I told him. Henry rolled his eyes. That's not even funny, he chastised me. Come on, Henry, I know it's a big issue. I need your perspective. I don't even know what I'm going to do. I shook my head, scratching my hair randomly. He handed me the corners of a sheet, and we lined them up, folding them together. Well, are you going to see him again? Henry asked, his tone strange and concerned. Yeah, we plan to meet tonight, I said. Henry shook his head. That is such a bad idea, and you know it, he said. I shrugged. Yes, part of me knew it was a bad idea, but every time I thought about Asher, I smiled and my stomach fluttered. Why is it a bad idea? I asked. Well, he's engaged, for one, Henry pointed out, not to mention the obvious difference in social class. Think about it, Dick, his obligation is to the pack. If he has to, he'll reject you. You should probably keep your distance and avoid getting more attached to him. I swallowed hard, my heart already aching at the mere prospect of Asher rejecting me. He was so kind and sweet. The temperature on my cheeks continued to rise. It must be the only dream I don't want to wake up from. After last night, I wasn't sure if he could, but I also knew Henry had a point. Asher was Prince Regent and probably the future alpha. That meant he could never truly accept me as his maid. I was a servant, I grumbled to myself, tossing the folded sheet aside and grabbing some shirts to fold. Maybe you should just reject him first and get it over with, Henry offered. I stared at him, my shirt slipping from my hands. What? I asked. I can't. I trailed off. I hadn't even considered that. There was absolutely no way I was going to reject Asher. At least, that was what I kept telling myself. Come on, Dick. I can already tell you are smitten, Henry said. I giggled and nodded, unable to hide it. If you keep seeing him, you're going to fall head over heels in love. You know it, but that way just lies pain and rejection, and before I knew it, I am more surprised to find my little brother had become visionary. Henry raised an eyebrow at me. Hey, I'm serious, Dick. Yes, it could be a possibility. I nodded, a very real possibility. If you reject him first, it will be painful but a clean break, he said. You'll free yourself from more pain later on, and you'll free him to focus on his responsibilities. I don't know, Henry, I muttered. We were silent for a while, folding clothes. Henry kept looking up at me and shaking his head. He smirked at me and leaned down, kissing my nose, cheeks, and lips again and again. Engrave them in my soul, Vika. I could tell he was concerned. Seriously, Dick, even if you do spend time with him, it isn't like he can make you his maid, Henry said sharply. You have no idea if he is planning on actually pursuing anything with you, or if he just wants to get to know what kind of female his maid is before rejecting you. He might have already decided to. No matter what, people said, the outsiders saw the best of the game. Henry verified that now, but my heart kept telling me not to make a rash decision. Okay, I'll think about it, I said. I love you, sis, but we are Omegas. It really sucks when your mate isn't, but that is just the way it goes, Henry said. His eyes were sympathetic. I didn't want his pity. I scoffed and rolled my eyes. Can we talk about something else? I asked. Yes, but let me say one more thing. Henry trailed off, and I nodded. Princess Debbie is engaged to Asher. She will never let him go, even if you are his mate. Also, think of what she would do to you if she found out. My back still itched from the healing whip cuts on my back. I winced and looked away from Henry. We continued folding our laundry. Henry carried the conversation, updating me on scandals and rumors floating around the castle and things with Mom and Dad. He licked my earlobe and whispered in my ear, "I will remember our every kiss with my soul." The breeze gently caressed our faces, again and again, until we parted our lips. Even as I tried to focus on what he was saying and be part of the conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about Asher. Everything made me think of him. The light glinting off the laundry detergent as I poured it into the washer with a fresh load made me think of his eyes. Well, yeah, clearly I was already in too deep. I pulled my cell phone out a few times, intending to text Asher and cancel our training session. Henry kept pushing me to do it. I just couldn't bring myself to type the message. There was still the big problem of him being engaged and our social statuses hanging heavily over anything we might try to build. "Vika, we're done with laundry. Time to take a break," Henry told me, waving his hand in front of my face to get my attention. I grunted, snapping out of my trance. There was lunch waiting for us in the kitchen. "Have you made a decision yet?" Henry asked me. I shrugged. "Not yet," I sighed. "I can't stop thinking about him. Maybe I should just go tonight and see what happens." "Maybe," Henry said. "You know, whatever you decide, I'll be here. Whether that is to congratulate you or pick up all the tiny pieces of your shattered heart," he told me. "Thanks ever so. At least I had a brother who could joke." Asher's POV. "What? No way, man." Malcolm, my best friend, grabbed my shoulders and told me, "Bad news that way. You've got to reject her." "Excuse me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Asher, she is an omega," he said.